Yes, my name is Caleb Allen. I'm a founding engineer at Asiris Data Systems, and my talk is entitled REPL Without a Pause, Bringing Vim Bindings to the Julia REPL. I'm excited to share with you the journey that Vim Bindings package has taken from its inception until now. Part of my learning journey of Julia and a lot of the interesting things I learned about the REPL. So the first thing to ask is, what is VimBindings.jl? This is a package which emulates Vim directly in the Julia REPL. So why would you want to do this is maybe a question some people would have. I think there's a Stack Overflow post that is prescient that many people who have used Vim might have seen before, which is this one. How do I exit Vim? It has 5,000 upvotes and says, I'm stuck and cannot escape. And when they try to escape, they can't. So I want to direct your attention to this phrase, I'm stuck and cannot escape, and take it from a more philosophical view of Vim. You know, beyond just escaping the program itself, I think Vim users will find themselves unable to escape Vim in every piece of software that they look at. They say, well, why would you exit Vim? Why would you ever want to use a program that isn't Vim? So what is the infection vector for Vim? That's plugins. So if you're using IntelliJ, a very powerful piece of software, you want it to be Vim, right? So you install the Idea Vim plugin, and suddenly it's Vim. Same thing with Google Chrome. That's not a text editor. Why would you ever, but I want it to be Vim, and so you run Vimium. Same thing with VS Code, which is, it is a text editor, but it's not Vim. You can make it Vim with the VS Code NeoVim text editor extension. And most insulting of all, you can even make Emacs Vim with evil mode. So a question that has long persisted in the Julia community is, why isn't the Julia REPL also Vim? And my hope is to show you how VimBindings.jl maybe gives that question an answer. So here are a few posts over the years of community members asking for VI modes as they are used to in Fish Shell or Bash or whatever. This one is from 2014 from an Arch user, by the way, who was trying to get Vim working on Julia and wasn't able to. Another one from 2018, and most recently 2022. So I started learning Julia in the pandemic. It was kind of a coping mechanism of mine, and shortly after starting to learn Julia, set out to build a Vim binding mode. And my first approach was to look at the REPL modes that already exist out there, right? You have the Julia mode that we're all familiar with, help mode, which you access with the key binding question mark, package mode, shell mode, search mode. And what I want you to draw your attention to here is first that, that you're accessing these by key bindings, and second, that each mode has a vastly different behavior than any other mode, right? What you can do in the help mode is completely different from what you can do in the Julia mode. So this extends to user packages as well. Most recently, here are two examples. There's REPL GPT, where you can enter a GPT mode, where you can converse with ChatGPT, and SQL REPL, a package which gives you a REPL mode for executing SQL statements, so you never have to leave Julia. So let's take a look at what the mechanism is for these key bindings, right? So for example, getting to help mode, you're going to want to map the question mark. And so when you run the question mark, you get to the help mode. This is what the standard library looks like. As you can see, it checks to see if there is any text in the prompt, and if there is no text, then moves the user into help mode. Otherwise, it inserts a question mark. So it's a pretty simple way to do it. It's a dictionary where the key is the character, the key that you're trying to map, and then the value of the dictionary is a function. And so what happens when you press the question mark on your keyboard? So the journey of that byte looks like this in the standard REPL right now. So you press the question mark, the REPL reads the byte value of it, 3F in this case. It matches the input, meaning it looks at the key map that it's got and says, okay, do I have any key binding for this value? In the case of the question mark, we just saw the function is the help function. So it gets that function and it calls it. So pretty simple. I wanted to try this approach to implement the first kind of versions of what you want to get with Vim bindings, which is HJKNL, what we all are familiar with if anyone who's tried to learn Vim. So this is what that looks like. Similarly, we're creating a dictionary where the key is the keyboard key that you want to press, and then the value is the function that gets called. So again, pretty straightforward. And similarly to the question mark, this is what that looks like with these modifications, which are in the startup.jl. So the user presses H, the byte is read from the input. We look to see if there's a function that calls for this key, and indeed there is, the one we just defined on the slide before. And so we call that function. So this is what that looks like in action. And this black box shows the key input as it's happening. So you can see when I press H and L, rather than typing H and L, it navigates back and forth. The problem is now you can't write a hello world program, which is, you can't really write anything. So rather than adding it to the main mode, my next approach was to create a new mode, a normal mode in this case. So this is the code that does that. You can see I've implemented more keys and trying out more complex motions like E, which in Vim goes to the end of a word. So this adds more keys to a new mode. Okay, so this is what that looks like. And this is actually with the package from like 2 years ago. You can see that I'm able to enter text as normal. Escape doesn't work, and we'll come back to that later. And so instead I'm using the backtick. But once I'm back in normal mode, which is indicated by the prompt being changed to N, we can move around pretty well. You can see that E didn't really go to the correct end of word, right? So there's still kinks to work out. But the main problem we're also having is that once we're in help mode, we can't go back into normal mode. So there's kind of this problem where we want to be transitioning between modes. And that brings us to the escape problem. Anybody who's used a terminal application or tried to write one might be familiar with this. In order to understand the escape problem, we need to understand control sequences. So how does the REPL handle special characters? And so by special characters, I mean when you press a key on your keyboard that doesn't enter text, right? So the arrow keys, page up, page down, escape, which we will come back to again. And the way it does it, the way terminals encode that is with escape sequences. So you can see right arrow is encoded with this sequence of letters. So escape key, and then an open bracket, and then capital C. When that is sent to a terminal application, it should be interpreted as pressing of the right arrow. And this is from the standard REPL library right now. So what happens when you have to read multiple bytes, right, rather than just one? The REPL handles it quite well. So you have the user pressing the left arrow key, and that's 3 bytes, not 1. So we can only read 1 byte at a time. And so we read the first byte. which is the escape character. We match that. We see if that's in our key map. Once we do find that, it's not a function this time, but it's an additional key map, a nested key map. And that is for every key that starts with the escape key. So we recurse and we call this matching function again. And we read another byte, in this case 5b, which is for the open square bracket. We match that with the key map that we have, and then receive another key map. And so we recurse again, and we read that final byte. Okay, so finally, by the end of this, we get the function for the right key, for moving right, and that is called, or move left. So let's go through the journey of the escape key, and this will demonstrate the problem that the escape key causes to a lot of applications. So the user presses the escape key, and that gets sent to the terminal application as 1 byte escape. Okay, so we read that in, we match the input, and we find the nested key map. Okay, so we go and recurse, and we try to find the next byte, and we have another key. We're waiting for a byte that's never going to come. And this is well known in a lot of applications. This is a little small, but it says a comment in the lineedit.jl, which is in the REPL source code, says it's difficult to bind escape itself. So how do you do that? The solution is kind of silly, but a lot of applications do it. So whenever you receive an escape ASCII value, you wait for a few short moments and decide if you've gotten more bytes. Well, this probably is the beginning of a control sequence. It's not, if there are no bytes, then the escape key was probably pressed. And that's exactly what VimBindings does. It reads and says, okay, if we've got a bunch more characters coming in, then this is a control sequence. If there are no bytes available, then it's probably the escape key. And surprisingly, there are a lot of applications that implement this. Users of Vim who have used Vim within tmux will be familiar with this because by default, tmux has a 500 millisecond waiting period before they determine whether a key was a control sequence or whether it was an escape key. So this, I started modifying the REPL code, which I think it causes, maybe isn't a good thing to do as a package, right? But by the time I was doing it anyways, could I just start intercepting more, right? So the answer is yes, that's what VimBinding does. So now with the modifications of VimBindings, this is what a byte looks like. The user presses H, we read that in as normal, and we match our input to see if that we have a binding for H, and instead of just sending that directly to the default binding, if Vim is in normal mode, as the VimBindings package describes, then we send that to Vim. If it's otherwise, we send it to the default implementation. So then we call that function. So the benefit of this is that VimBindings is no longer a REPL mode. It separates Vim from the REPL modes. It acts on top and before keys are delivered to the REPL modes. So that's kind of an overview of how VimBindings integrates with the REPL, and I'm going to articulate some of the features that have been built. So kind of in a somewhat random order. The first one's kind of a slap in the face, which I'm very not proud of, but is the way it is. This is parsing the Vim commands with a bunch of really terrible, really ugly regular expression commands. And the reason for this is when I started, the regular expressions were, a couple characters. It wasn't so bad. And then it has grown and grown and grown to the point where it looks like this. It's really unpleasant. I've tried to refactor it a couple times, and I'm close, but not quite there. So what happens is we take in characters as they come in, and then we match them to these regular expressions. And once we've found a match, we pass it into these structs, these command structs. And there's a command abstract type and then many subtypes. And once we have that, we execute it. So this is what one of the execute methods looks like. This is for the case of insert command. The insert command there are a handful of different versions of it, right? You can use A to go to append, I to go to insert mode immediately, O to create a new line. And there are method implementations for all of the command subtypes. So one thing that was really helpful during my development was some of the logging solutions that I put together. One problem when developing the REPL is that output from of logs or whatever can't go to standard output anymore because you're using the REPL, right? If you press a key and you want to log something of how that's being handled, that's spat out into the standard output. So instead, when I'm in my development flow, I log it out to a pipe so that I can have this kind of side-by-side view, which makes it much easier. Another helpful tool that was useful in development was creating a wrapper type around I/O buffer, which essentially helped to create a bunch of motion commands, text object commands, which are need to be character perfect. So as you can see with this test buffer up here, I can say hello world, and what this is doing is creating a buffer where the cursor is at this position. And implementing the show method lets me have this nice output where the cursor is represented by these two bar characters. And so you can do that for insert mode as well. So when writing tests, you can do something like this, where when I'm running, let's say you had this text in a Vim buffer, and I run the command cfd, what this should do is change all of the text until up through the first occurrence of a D. And so that's what this is testing for here. And it should also change to insert mode. So that's indicated by this pipe surrounding an I. So another tool that was very helpful was during implementing the undo and redo feature was implementing a show method for it, which kind of showed me which entry was the active entry, right? So you have a big long list and you want to go back and forth, and understanding where you are in that, especially in development, is important. So the resulting logs of that look like this, where the most recent history entry is the one with the arrow, and if you press U to undo it, it would go to the one before, and if you press Control R, it would go back forward again. A final thing that really changed the package, especially in the last 6 months or so, was pre-compilation. The user experience of it was really not good for quite a long time, because as this kind of shows, the first time you use a command, it takes quite a while to execute, and that's the time to first X problem. So going into normal mode, the first time you use a command, it's bad, and this one in particular, it takes almost half a second on the first use of a command. So trying that again, right? The second time you use a command, it works just fine, but that once you leave your REPL session and come back, that's really unpleasant to have to try to use a bunch of commands again to get it to speed up. So with precompiled tools, this is the user experience afterwards. So this is using, the previous was without any precompilation. This is with precompilation. As you can see, the first use does take a little bit longer to load, but this only happens on installation. And then afterwards, everything is essentially instant. So moving around and editing text is quite fast, and good enough that I actually began using it as enabled by default whenever I'm using the Julia REPL, which I only did between the time that this talk was accepted and right now. So I'm glad that 1.9 came out, because I had this great title, REPL without a pause, that my wife came up with, and so now it actually is without a pause. And the last thing is changing the cursor style. This is kind of just a design decision where, as you saw before, the mode is indicated by escape, by a block cursor when in normal mode, and by a bar cursor when in insert mode. And the reason for that is that it no longer breaks the copy-paste behavior of the REPL, which relies on the prompt, the Julia and the caret prompt line. And it also looks nicer, I think. So the features that VimBindings.jl has are these. Quite a few motions. We've got a decent amount of operators. Yank was just implemented experimentally just with the system clipboard, not with registers, but I think that one would be pretty quick. Some text objects, some insert commands, some delete commands, and undo and redo, which fit the Vim semantics of undoing and redoing edits rather than specific character entries, right? So when you go, essentially what was the state of the buffer the last time you entered or exited insert mode. So my hope is that this would be enough to add VimBindings.jl to this infection list, where Vim has kind of creeped out and now can be called, now the Julia REPL can also be Vim, at least a subset of Vim. So as far as where this goes in the future, I would really like to hear feedback. I really enjoy building tooling, and I want to be hearing people's thoughts about, is this useful? Is there, adding more features may or may not be a great idea, right? Is time of tooling development spent better with this or elsewhere or something like that? So one idea that has floated around, well, as I was saying, we could implement more text objects pretty easily because the structure is all there. But something like visual mode, I think, is just, the complexity of that might not be worth trying. But there is kind of an approach that's been floated where instead of just implementing all of these in Julia, you just forward everything back and forth between an instance of NeoVim. And in that way, you get the entire full feature set of Vim without actually needing to implement it all. But it would also come with some design challenges of synchronizing those buffers and so forth. So thank you. If you would like to try VimBindings, it's up on the registry, so you can try it and install it that way. Miles Cramner was a great contributor, so I want to thank him. Christopher Carlson, who wrote Oh My REPL, I've looked a lot at that code, and that's been great. And also Tim Holy for pre-compilation or pre-compile tools, which has totally changed the user experience of this package. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Caleb. Is there any questions? Hi, thank you very much for the talk. Can you briefly talk about the second approach where you have like an instance of NeoVim or Vim running in the background? Because one of the things I was interested in is instead of having to rewrite all the, let's say, plugin features, right, of Vim or NeoVim, or like if I want to have my custom like Vim config to work here, I think it would be unwieldy to write all of that in Julia. So yeah, is there like anything being implemented right now, or it's just in the idea phase?
That's a great question. I agree that, yeah, you're not going to get full implementation, right, of Vim rewriting everything in Julia. That's a little masochist, and maybe I'm a little masochist already for having done this. But yeah, I did try an experiment of synchronizing with NeoVim a couple years ago, and I think it's worth revisiting. I'm not sure if there are any initiatives of building that, but I think I would like to look into that. The design challenges that come out of that are unknown to me, right? The best example is NeoVim VS Code integration, where there are certain features that don't work totally correctly because of some fundamental way that their buffers can't synchronize. And I'm not exactly sure the details of that, but I think it's worth looking into.
Any other questions? Yeah, and tell me how much exercise this would be.
So first of all, thank you, especially for the large amount of work you put into getting Escape working. So
sure.
Can I modify it to not be Escape?
To be what instead?
I use JJ, for instance, to exit.
Sure.
mode.
Yeah, you file a request, and I just implemented preferences.jl, so the structure is there for adding a little bit of customization right now. So yeah, file a request, and I think that would be pretty straightforward to get implemented.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any further questions?
Hi. You've said that you like to implement tooling, and this reminds me of a dream of mine that I had in the past of having a Pluto mode for the REPL, to sort of, instead of having Pluto in the browser, having Pluto in the REPL. It might be a nice project for since you've already.
What do you mean by that? Like.
Instead of editing the Pluto notebook in the browser, you will have the REPL mode acting as a notebook.
Where you can kind of go between cells,
Yeah,
something like that.
and
That's interesting.
Yeah, and
Well, and the some of the learnings from this are that a lot of the text operations aren't really specific to Vim, right? You could use this with just a standard text editing system. But yeah, that's an interesting idea.
I think
Maybe we talk afterwards a little bit.
It
Yeah.
would be very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question, or are we up there?
It's just more of a comment, but there is a package out there for doing that with Pluto. For NeoVim as a plugin, and it wraps Dino. You can do something like that. It's kind of neat. And then also there's a extension that does in NeoVim called Magma that uses Jupyter's REPL. So something to check out.
So maybe it's already available. Yeah. I mean, NeoVim is an incredible thing. You can do anything in there. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's thank Caleb again, please.